Hello and welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission on Tuesday, October 26, 2021. This meeting is called to order. I'll request staff to call the roll for commissioners who are present and not. Leslie?
Yes. Commissioner Harris.
Present.
Commissioner Haberman. He's present but muted.
Present.
Commissioner Lubomirski has an absence tonight. Commissioner Mercado.
Here.
Commissioner Saudi.
Present.
Awesome. Thank you. Oops, I did that one wrong. Vice Chair Prevatelli, who is chair tonight.
Here.
And Chair Samudzi is absent.
Great, thanks Leslie. All right, next we'll move on to the order of the agenda. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Next we'll move on to the meeting procedures. Due to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order, we have had to establish new ways of conducting our public meetings. I'd like staff to address how public comment will work this evening. Leslie?
Yes, thank you, Chair Prevatelli. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone other than the commissioners to turn off their cameras until it's your turn to present. Thank you. The meeting is being recorded and streamed live to YouTube viewers. Viewers are welcome to attend by telephone by calling 669-900-9129 and entering the meeting ID, which is 897-5534-1830#. That's also available on the agenda, the Planning Commission agenda, which is online. You may watch directly through Zoom using the link on the agenda. If you are participating by telephone tonight and wish to provide public comment, when public comment is open, please press *9 for the raise your hand feature. Once you hear a notification that the host is inviting you to speak, you'll have to press *6 to unmute yourself. And all speakers, if you're here more in person, meaning just directly online, please use the raise the hand icon found at the bottom of your screen. Everyone will have 3 minutes for public comment. If you submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, it has been forwarded to the Planning Commission. And I will say, with the exception of the one I just received after hours, so that will go in the public record and will be forwarded to our CEQA consultant for part of the comment collection. Closed captioning is available for this meeting and the link is on YouTube. And thank you.
Great, thanks Leslie. Let me now describe the meeting procedures. As this is a comment hearing for a draft EIR, Environmental Impact Report, the procedure is slightly different. We will begin with a staff report from the CEQA consultant. Then we will hear from the applicant. Applicant, please try to keep your presentation to no more than 10 minutes. Members of the public will then be invited to speak and we'll have 3 minutes. People on the conference call can speak when they receive the notification. They have been asked to unmute themselves. Commission will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff, applicant, or public after each segment. We will then close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for comment. At this time, is there anyone with any urgent communication on a topic not on the agenda? If there is, you may address the commission at this time.
And again, if you wish to comment and you're dialing in, please press *9 to raise your hand. And if you are otherwise online, you can just use the raise your hand icon. And no one wishes to speak on this item.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leslie. We'll now move on to the consent calendar, which has one item, the minutes from October 12th, 2021, the San Rafael Planning Commission meeting. Do I hear any action? Do I hear an action to approve the San Rafael Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 12th, 2021?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Are there any comments from the public on the consent calendar? Okay, thank you.
And again,
There-
if you wish to,
Go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry.
if you wish to comment on the consent calendar, please raise your hand by dialing *9 if you're dialing in, or using the raise the hand icon at the bottom of the screen. No comments.
Okay. Sorry, I kind of took that out of order. Are there any comments from the commission? Hearing none, I think we already had a proposal to accept the minutes and also a second. So if there is no discussion, Leslie, could you take a roll call?
Yes, and the motion was by Commissioner Mercado, and the second was by Commissioner Saudi. Roll call. Commissioner Harris.
Aye.
Commissioner Haveman.
Aye.
Mr. Lubomirsky is absent. Commissioner Mercado.
Yes.
Commissioner Saudi.
Yes.
Chair Previtali.
Yes.
And then Commissioner Samudzi is absent.
Excellent, thank you. We'll now move on to tonight's item for public hearing, the Tiscornia Marsh Restoration Project north of Canal Street. May I request the staff report, please?
Yes, and I would like to introduce Elisa Moore of ESA. They're our amazing CEQA consultant who has really taken the lead in moving this project forward. So with that, Lisa, maybe you can introduce the rest of your team. I'd also like to say that if there's any questions, though this is a comment hearing, I am here from the planning department. We also have April Miller here from Department of Public Works, who's our deputy director of Public Works. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you for having us here tonight. Elisa Moore with Environmental Science Associates, as was mentioned. We will be here to present the Tiscornia Marsh, a bit on the Tiscornia Marsh draft EIR, which is at the end of its comment period now. And with me tonight, we have Dane Behrens, who will be presenting a bit on the project itself as a representative of the project proponent, which is Marin Audubon Society. Also with us tonight, we have Barbara Salzman from Marin Audubon Society, as well as Anne Borganova with our design team, along with Dane, and we also have Rachel Carnes here from our CEQA team. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and share screen so we can share a presentation by Dane and myself.
Sounds good, thank you.
All right,
Please
great,
proceed.
thank you. All right, and I think you can see this PowerPoint is up now. If not, please let me know. And as mentioned, we'll be presenting on the draft EIR. And there we go. So this is a project that ESA has been supporting the city's planning department on as a CEQA lead agency. And as mentioned, with the Marin Audubon Society as the project proponent. We have worked with the city to prepare an environmental impact report and also prepared an initial study previously that initiated our CEQA process. That notice of preparation was released in January of this year with a 30-day comment period, and we held a scoping meeting with you on February 23rd of this year. The draft EIR itself was published in September and was issued to the State Clearinghouse as well as your and the Marin Audubon Society's project website. And we also did a newspaper legal ad notice and then also submitted notification of the availability of the draft EIR to adjacent parcels, interested parties, and other agencies that may be interested in this project or have a responsibility to issue a permit should the project move forward. The end of the comment period is today, and we're here today for the commission hearing to receive public input as well as your input. With that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Dane to talk a bit about the project itself to tee up the draft EIR discussion.
Thank you, Lisa. So as she was saying, I'm going to try to give just kind of an overview of what the project is, leading up into her discussion on CEQA in a few minutes. And again, so my name is Dan. I'm a civil engineer with ESA. And I'm joined here by Ann Borganovo on our team. And so essentially, where this all started, I should give you a quick overview of what the site, what Tiscornia Marsh is. So if you look down at this sort of plan view image here of where the canal or San Rafael Creek comes out to the bay, what we call Tiscornia Marsh is this sort of eastern fringing marsh that wraps around that walking path that goes around the El Boro Community Center and Pickleweed Park. And so, excuse me. So one of the reasons why this project came to be is that this marsh is really a valuable habitat for several endangered species, and it's been eroding for some time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide in a second. But and another thing that's really kind of critical here is that this part of the shoreline defense system for San Rafael is one of the lower sections of the shoreline levee. And so this was sort of a critical pathway for raising flood defense for the city as part of this long-term sea level rise adaptation. So those things all sort of converged at this site. We went through the concepts in 2018, and as part of this phase of the project, we advanced those a bit further to set up the CEQA process. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So just probably good to highlight what the project area is. So this project started within Marin Audubon Society's parcel, which covers that eastern marsh and some of the offshore mudflats. But should mention that we've worked really actively with the City of San Rafael on this. So the city owns the parcel, including the soccer field, and also that diked off enclosed marsh to the north of that, and also the areas to the west before you hit Sorrento Way. And so the project really expanded to include those areas because the city had written a white paper in 2014 looking at sea level rise opportunities for adaptation, and they looked at that enclosed parcel as an opportunity. It's actually compatible marsh habitat that's completely unconnected from the bay right now. But so we were looking at this project as an opportunity to restore existing habitats, raise flood defense, and really to engage the community, as this is like the backyard for the Canal neighborhood, and this is something that they have ownership of, and it's kind of a rare thing to have a functional marsh along the bay right now, where a lot of places are riprap shorelines. So a lot of things came together for this project. So going to the next slide. So to give some historical context, at least quickly here, as I said, the marsh has been eroding, and so what I mean by that is every day as high tide comes up and touches the edge of that marsh, wind waves are sort of chipping away at the edge of the marsh. And it's been eroding at around 3 to 5 feet per year for the last 5 or 6 decades. And so essentially what the do nothing project alternative would be if there was no project, we would essentially be looking at losing the marsh in the next 20 or 30 years. And so that's problematic because you lose the habitat. It's also problematic because you then expose that walking path to much greater erosion and much more risk of overtopping during flood events, which is obviously an unacceptable risk. And so we wanted to use this project to address that concern. So going to the next slide. So this is an existing conditions map, and it's got these kind of weird colors on it. The idea here is I just wanted to set things up in this color scheme because in the next slide I'll show what the project is. But again, this orange boundary here is sort of the project boundary that we're working within. And so again, it includes that eastern portion of marsh outside the walking field or the walking path, and also the enclosed portion of marsh that's currently just north of the soccer field, but within that walking path. And then the areas just to the west of that. And so I should mention here that, in coordination with the city, there's an overlapping in this area of a lot of different projects. I understand the city is working on improving the soccer field. And then, there's going to be improved parking near the location of former location of Shoreline Park to the south. And there's other projects. There's a trash capture project that would happen on the western side. We've been in coordination with the city throughout this process so we can kind of merge all those things together as part of this project. And so before advancing, sorry, you can go back one second. I want to point out that yellow line with the dashed black line on top. that's the existing shoreline defense right now. And so right now it's kind of an uneven dirt and gravel pathway that's not really engineered. And the lowest point in it right now is around Shone Park. And that's pretty much the highest vulnerability it's one of the highest vulnerabilities that Central San Rafael has in terms of flooding. So now we can go ahead. So essentially what we're doing, what the project looks like, and I'll try to step through this slowly so it's clear. There's several elements of this, but number one would be raising the levee. And so essentially we would be using this opportunity to raise the levee to a level that would provide much greater flood protection in the long term, not just for today's standards, but also to include some amount of sea level rise as well. And in addition to that, we wouldn't just be raising the levees, we would actually be, in some locations, actually setting them slightly back and having a flatter slope out onto the marsh. And the reason for that is that it provides more habitat value, it's more adaptive for sea level rise, and it's more stable. And so that's those darker green areas would be like a flatter slope than you would normally have for, for a lot of levees. And so beyond that, the light green areas are areas where we are looking to restore marsh. And so that eastern portion that the cursor is over right now, we're essentially looking to restore the marsh that's been eroded in the last 50 or 60 years. And so one of the kind of fun aspects of this project and one of the innovative things is we're actually looking to beneficially reuse dredge material, from local marinas in the area. And so that's one of these kind of future sea level rise adaptation pathways that we're all sort of thinking about. Why can't we use material like that would normally be dumped somewhere else, and it's native to this watershed? And so we're looking to rebuild that outboard marsh with dredge material that would become available from local marinas. But since we know that marsh has been eroding, we're fronting that marsh with a gravel beach on the eastern side. And that's a new concept within the last 10 or 20 years that people are trying out. It provides habitat for shorebirds, but it also prevents the marsh behind it from eroding. And so as part of all this, after we build that new marsh to the east, we would have a tidal channel along what's now the existing edge of the marsh would become a tidal channel that would connect on the south end. That's that blue line there. And then also that enclosed part of the marsh that I was mentioning earlier to the west, to the left up there, that's light green. So essentially we would be taking that outer walking path and creating a new levee behind it. Essentially the new levee alignment would be along the northern edge of the soccer field. And then as part of this, we would lower the existing outboard walking path and open that marsh up to tidal action again. So that would be another piece in all of this. It would all be one contiguous marsh unit. And then lastly, tying this all off on the western end, we would extend the levee to the west. And so there's a couple alignments that we're looking at, but we're sort of there's still another year or so worth of design work to do where we'll figure some of these things out. But essentially we will tie off the levee on the western edge and incorporate that little piece of marsh as well. And so that's why I was mentioning earlier that there are a lot of projects going here. That western edge is where there will be a trash capture project that's also going to get constructed at some point in the next few years. And so we would be merging with that essentially at that location. So that's covers most of the basics of this project. And so essentially we have about 8 acres of tidal marsh now. We would be expanding that to 16 acres. And so, again, the main goals here are providing much better flood protection, as part of a long-term sea level rise adaptation, preserving habitat, and engaging the community in their backyard here. And so going next to the schedule, just wanted to give a quick overview of this. And again, this is something that might be refined, but we're envisioning this as a 3-year process. And so the reason for that is because it's important habitat it's habitat for endangered species. There are a lot of protections in place for when you can construct things. And so essentially we would be working within windows when it wouldn't be nesting season for ridgeway rails at the site. And so we would be mostly working in summer and fall over 3 years. But first starting with sort of site access and preparation and building that outer beach first in the first year. And then in the next year, doing the levee protection, the levee improvements behind that along the shoreline. and then placing dredge material and expanding and restoring that marsh. And then letting that dry over about 6 months, and then finishing the construction in the 3rd year. And so we're envisioning this as a 3-year process essentially. So that covers the basics of the design. I hope that sets things up well enough for Elisa's portion of the talk.
Thank you, Dane. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the draft EIR, which includes a detailed summary of the project description that Dane laid out. And that project description also includes a great deal of information about how this project would be constructed, beyond its timing that Dane shared, just the overall construction equipment, the materials that would be needed, the volume of materials that would be needed for this project, and then the phasing of it. And also discusses the operational details, which are fairly minimal once the project is established and the plantings and the marsh has taken hold. Most of the operational activities are typical operations and maintenance activities that already would be similar to what would occur currently. We then conducted an impact analysis for various resource topics that are required under CEQA, all the resource topics required under CEQA. And as would be expected with a project like this with minimal operational activities, the majority of the impacts that we identified relate to the construction activities that are required. It's a big project, and there's a lot of activities that would be required to get the project built as Dane described. We did not identify any significant unavoidable impacts. All the impacts that we did identify could be mitigated to lessen significant. And the topics that would require mitigation to get to less than significant would be air quality emissions related to the various construction activities required, as well as biological resources impacts associated with some of the species that Dane mentioned, such as black rail and ridgeway rail, as well as sensitive plant species and fish and marine species that are present that may be present in the area. And the mitigation requirements for that mostly relate to pre-construction surveys to identify whether the species are present or not, and then some avoidance techniques that would allow construction to proceed at least in some parts of the work area while being protective of these resources. We also have a significant impact identified for cultural resources and tribal culture resources, but there are no known resources in this area of concern, but we are always concerned with this amount of earth moving activity that there could be accidental discovery. So we have procedures in place identified in the EIR to ensure that if an accidental discovery is made, that it's treated appropriately. There are a number of impact topics that we evaluated that were not significant in terms of CEQA, and those included this very large list, including aesthetic resources and some biological resources that didn't get mentioned on the prior slide, and then some of our topics like energy use and greenhouse gas emissions and transportation and traffic. We also looked at alternatives to CEQA, which is required for an environmental impact report, and CEQA alternatives must meet project objectives and lessen and avoid significant impacts of a project and be feasible. So we looked at alternatives that were evaluated early on in the engineering evaluation process, but really focused on those that would meet this CEQA requirement of lessening and avoiding significant impacts. And with this project's significant impacts being mostly associated with construction, the best approach to CEQA alternatives is a project that is a little bit smaller. So we looked at a no project alternative, which is required under CEQA, as well as a couple of reduced project alternatives. One that reduces the amount of Tiscornia marsh restoration on that eastern end, and one that eliminates the diked marsh restoration to the north. We are required to identify an environmentally superior alternative, and that we identified as eliminate the diked marsh portion, because that was the alternative that would reduce the amount of construction the most. However, we do note that it only partially meets project objectives and provides the least amount of habitat benefit and flood benefit, and also with the lack of that improvement area is more vulnerable to additional flooding. And so we expect that it would reduce the lifetime expectancy of the project if that were the approach that were taken. So that's kind of a big picture overview of the content of the EIR. Happy to answer any additional questions that you may have, but wanted to round out with just the next steps in the EIR process, which is for us to work with the planning department to work on a response to comments, which we expect to complete in the next couple of months. We were hoping to target your December 14th commission meeting, but learned from Leslie that your agenda may be a little too crowded for us to be before you with this project on the 14th. And so we may be deferring into the early part of the next year. Oops. And that was my last slide.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Dane, both for an excellent presentation. I thought that was very clear and useful. All right, so are there, at this time, are there any questions for staff or the applicant by the Planning Commission?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, first I want to thank you guys for putting together such a thoughtful report. You can really, I know we saw it last time or a while ago, so it's good to see it back up. And I think, I just want to start by saying, I think we're all really behind this. It seemed like there was good energy behind this project. I personally support this project. And looking at some of the letters that came in and the comments, and then I had a couple questions about some of the points. So I'll try to get through it quickly. But one of the comments was from Warren Weisenberg concerning the Dyked Marsh area. And I think we talked about, we looked at that area earlier in the diagram that you provided. Could you pull that up actually while we're talking about it, just so everyone can see? And the question that he showed was basically, and I don't know where his findings come from because he's not really stating findings, but that basically all of the oak and scrub habitat that's formed since the original tidal marsh has been worn away will, if we bring it back to dike marsh or to a marsh, a tidal marsh, that liquefaction, he's concerned about liquefaction and settlement. So, and a tidal flow that may impact the site, but it looks like with the tidal channels and the breach levees that should not be of concern. I just wanted to address that as an issue. Is my first question. I'll probably let you answer them so we can go through them pretty quickly.
I'll start and I'll invite Dane to chime in. And I'm sorry, my dog is barking in the background. Life at home.
I have kids, yeah. So it's all good.
I thought that was my dog.
Oh.
So Dane, go ahead and I'll follow what we covered in the CEQA documents.
Okay, there were a few parts to that, so I'm trying to understand. There was a question about liquefaction and a question about oak savanna conversion. I haven't seen the comment yet from the gentleman.
I think he's basically saying with all the habitat that's grown in the last 40 years, that once we remove that and it'll reintroduce a tidal flow, and he's concerned about liquefaction because there's no I'm assuming that he's making that connection because there's no longer any established dredge material, which he's calling the oaks and the scrub habitat.
And I'd like to interrupt 1 second. So because this is a comment meeting, and it's fine if you guys can answer the questions succinctly, but these are the comments and questions that will be answers as part of the response to comments document. So
okay,
I'm just letting ESA know that don't be, part of it is to go over the comments and be able to respond in a very thorough and comprehensive way. So I don't want anyone to feel like they're on the spot. First of all, the comments will be addressed. Yet, if you are able to answer it now, that's awesome too. So
for sure. I don't think it needs a full answer right now. I just want to know if they looked at liquefaction as I'm sure that was addressed in the EIR.
Yeah, I'll jump back in. My dog is still barking. Somebody's outside. Yeah, so the design team did do geotechnical analysis and did show some potential for subsidence and liquefaction with the soils that are present, but with the design as planned and the import of various materials, and Dane can jump back in, the design itself addresses the concern that was raised by the commenter. And we just got that, I think, late in the
Oh,
afternoon.
it was like one of the last, yeah, it was one of the last letters that came in for sure. But it was like the only letter that I think kind of raised concern. Most of them were in support, which is great. And then what does, I was trying to look this up, and I understand what a tidal channel looks like and sort of what it does, but can you explain to us what these tidal marshes do and like how you got to the shape of them? Because I guess when we look at the existing wetland, it looks like it's like protecting the existing wetland to the east, but then it's like it's coming into the new tidal marsh to the west, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So when we were looking at this, when we were starting to put this design together, our first basis for all of this is what was there historically. And so
yeah,
really this is the last little sliver of what used to be a marsh complex that spanned from the south bank of the canal down to San Quentin area. So so the marshes had like a historical channel network within them. And so part of the basis for the way things are shaped here was what was just the historical basis for the channels and how they were shaped. But to answer your other question, I mean, the marshes provide a lot of services, but one of the big ones, they're sort of meant to be flooded at high tides to get a little bit of water. And they essentially, they're part of the food web. So like water sloshes in and sloshes out, they provide intertidal habitat in the channels. And when the marshes get flooded even slightly, there's a lot of exchange of nutrients and things like that that contribute to the food web. So there's benefits that extend beyond just the marsh itself.
Okay, and then I have other questions, but I'll just leave this as the last question. But for now is, as we all experienced this weekend, we had a pretty significant flood event. So it's like a kind of a two-part question. Can you really tell us if what you saw from Sunday and how it impacted the site? If you guys were able to see kind of how, like, if your projected analysis of what's existing and what needs to be remediated kind of like verified your report. And then secondly, I see, like, not in this diagram, but in a past one, the sewer locations. And it kind of just like ends up at the upper west of the canal in the other diagram. But I wonder, like, what is happening with the sewer, and is there any potential discharge of sewer when we have a flood event, or was there one on Sunday?
I can answer some of that. So the sewer lines that you see there now, which are the lines that kind of go in that weird zigzag, by the time they get to the canal, they're about 30 to 50 feet deep. And so those are actually drilled underneath the canal and come up the other side. I don't know of any impacts related to the sewer lines. But I will say, in terms of the flooding, I would say the flood event on Sunday really reinforces kind of what we're trying to do here. There's two ways that you can get flooding in this kind of an area. One is just from the coast. If you have a really high tide event that's maybe got a lot of storm surge on top of that, that's something where you would need higher levees. And then there's another kind of flooding event where you get maybe high tides and you also get higher rainfall at the same time, which is what happened on Sunday. And so in that case, what you want is more areas off of the channel to absorb some of that water, but that are outside of the levees still. So like opening up a marsh area like this, you can kind of think of it like this. If you have a channel and you've got development on either side and you've got a big rainfall event, the only way for all that water coming down to go is upward, right? Because it's got a confined channel. If you add off channel areas, you're adding more areas to kind of sponge off that water during a high rainfall event. And so it's what we're trying to do would help for those types of events.
Yeah, so if we had a similar event, like say 5 years from now, when hopefully the project was complete, we wouldn't see the amount of flooding we did in the canal, like especially on that, like, I'm guessing there was a lot of flooding on the Spinnaker Point to the east and up through Canal Street.
I won't speculate on the amount. Like,
Okay.
it's hard to say for a specific event, but I would say probably the biggest aspect of this project that would protect the canal neighborhood is that right now the 100-year flood event is around, let me put it this way, the existing walking path is roughly around the elevation of a 100-year flood event right now. And with the project, it would be significantly higher. And so if you just add half a foot of sea level rise or 1 foot of sea level rise, something that's within the next 10, 20 years, that's a bad flood event in that case. And so raising the levee is probably the most important thing in terms of the flooding that we can do with this project. And I should say too, that like, this is one piece of the city's long-term management, and this project alone won't solve all of the potential, things that the city needs to address.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity to patch this part of the shoreline.
Yeah, I'm thankful that you guys have dedicated so much time and energy to this, and it's super thoughtful. And I think this weekend really highlighted the need for this project. And I think this is a neighborhood that we really need to focus on. I mean, there was an article in the IJ just this week about some of the social issues that are happening there. And I think we have to really focus on this. And I think this is a great way of really showing that we're taking care of all parts of San Rafael. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Commissioner Saudi. Commissioner Haveman?
Thank you, Commissioner Pravatelli. Yeah, so this is a terrific project, and yeah, thanks to everybody who's done the heavy lifting on it. My question is I think just a very brief one, and that is that the primary flood mitigation effects of this, if I understand right, will be realized when sort of adjoining dikes and other flood protection are in place. Partly because if you just raise this, water takes the path of least resistance, and will it be able to go around, or at this point, or will the result in adjoining areas?
Is it Commissioner Haveman, or is it my computer that's going funny?
I saw him break up a little bit there.
Okay. You broke up a little there.
I think I caught the gist of it.
Okay.
I would just point to, I'll try to, so as part of the general plan 2040 update, there was a report that we worked on for the city that was looking at sea level rise adaptation. And I guess the short answer to your question is that this is just one location. And I think a long-term comprehensive strategy, is going to have to involve looking at pieces of the shoreline that are low outside of the site, and looking at the pump stations, and looking at areas that are vulnerable to combined rainfall and high tides. We looked at a lot of locations that could just use a flat gate, like where Irwin Street floods, Irwin and Second, I think. Like there's a lot of things the city could do, and I would say though that, like, in terms of what are the biggest vulnerabilities to the Canal neighborhood and central San Rafael on this side of the canal, there's maybe 2 or 3 pretty big vulnerabilities, and one of them was this levee in particular. So we're trying to take this opportunity, and since it presented itself.
Oh yeah, no, I understand that. I just, given some of the comments, I wanted to set expectations.
Yeah.
Right? This isn't the solution to the flooding problem in the canal. This is a very important part of the solution.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Commissioner Haberman was also asking or maybe wanting to verify that this project wouldn't result in an exacerbation of issues on either side. And thinking you could probably respond to that, but that is not the case, right? Correct?
Yeah, it's not the case.
Thank you.
And I think part of that is one tying into, as Dane was saying, this is a more vulnerable area, so we're kind of bringing it up to some adjacent areas, but also providing more area for water to spread out and absorb. So, be a net benefit in terms of overall flood protection and wouldn't result in exacerbation adjacent areas.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Do any other commissioners have any questions?
I actually have a couple more if nobody has any. Sorry, I'm like hogging all the questions. But
Please
it's
go
my
ahead.
wheelhouse too, so I have some questions. What are the schedule impacts if we discover any artifacts? Like, do you think it's like a 3-month schedule impact? Is it a 6-month schedule impact? Like, what are we ballparking the schedule impacts there?
I think that I think you're talking about cultural resources artifacts. Okay, so we expect the likelihood of that occurring to be pretty low, next to nil, but we still want to be cautious and careful because it's an important resource. It's hard to know what the impact could be. Though, the worst case scenario would be finding human remains that is a stop altogether, and get the coroner as well as the identified tribal identified tribal representative to address what needs to happen. But more likely is something more like a small artifact. That is typically something where we can stop work in an immediate area, and as long as we're in the right phase of construction where there are other activities that could continue, that it wouldn't necessarily stop work altogether. Today we're working on another project that kind of has similar types of resources, and we were able to work out a way that work can continue on the most part, but we brought some potential cultural materials to an adjacent area and worked on it. Our cultural resources team worked on it there during construction while the rest of construction continued. So
okay,
I think in a case like this, it's a fairly minimal risk.
Okay, cool. And then I had a question about what the dredge material that you're actually you're reintroducing into the site. Like, what is that material?
Like, where would it come from and what is it? So right now, all the little harbors, so Loch Lomond, Marin Yacht Club, the canal itself, and even if you go further, if you go south to the Bridge District, down by Larkspur and other places, what happens is those channels fill up naturally over time. Those harbors fill up naturally over time, and it's from material that comes out of the creeks. And so that's just a natural process. That sediment will always accumulate and will always need somewhere to go if there's going to continue to be boat access. And so what happens typically is that the material is dredged mechanically and then taken off site. And usually folks that do that have a permit to drop it at Alcatraz or at a number of other locations where they have permits to do so. So it's a disposal thing. But one of the things that we're all trying to think about right now is how to reuse that material, because sediment is actually going to be a major resource with sea level rise. And so we're all kind of thinking about it, not just this project, but others too. But so for this one, we're talking about looking at like Loch Lomond, looking at other local marinas. And when they produce that material, every several years when they have to go dig it out, the idea would be to give them somewhere to put it that's 1,000 feet away instead of paying to take it off to Alcatraz or something.
Oh, that's great. That's good to hear. That's awesome. And then I think, yeah, that was my last question, actually.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Sadi. Actually, that question brought up a question for me. and that is around long-term maintenance. And I'm sorry if I missed this, but did the environmental impact report, the draft EIR, consider long-term maintenance and budget and basically the approach to maintaining the site?
I'll ask Dane to jump in, and perhaps Barbara would want to make a comment as well. But the ER does look at operations and maintenance activities. Once the site has reestablished itself and the marsh habitat is healthy, the O&M or operations and maintenance activities are pretty minimal for a project like this. The ER does not get into the cost of maintenance or any financial implications. That is not included under CEQA, but the level of activities are addressed in the CEQA document, and perhaps Dane and Barbara can comment further on what types of activities would occur.
Well, I would just say that we designed this site to be as self-maintaining as possible, and so to the extent that we can nowadays, we try to do that, where we try to design natural features, because like marshes and coarse edges that sometimes form along the fronts of them, because those things do actually self-maintain. But that said, as part of the permitting so as we carry the design past the EIR, we're going to have to go through a process of going after permits with all the permitting agencies. And one of the requirements that we'll have is to come up with a long-term monitoring plan. And so there will be a plan to look at how the site evolves. But we did try to design it in a way where it would self-maintain as much as possible. But to complete that answer, another wrinkle in all this is that, so there's a combination of ownerships here. Marin Audubon owns the eastern portion of the marsh and the mudflat. The city owns the levee, or most of the levee. And so some of it would be on city property. And, we're designing the levee to be at a pretty high elevation within reason, what we can given space constraints. But that would be something that, in the long term, the city would probably want to maintain.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Do any other commissioners have any comments or questions? I'm seeing none. Okay, great. Leslie, I think we can open it up for the public comments at this time.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, the applicant is here from the Audubon Society, Barbara Salzman, and no pressure, but Barbara, I don't know if you have any words you want to say?
Well, I really don't.
Okay, no worries.
I think our team has done a great job, and I'm certainly here if anybody wants to ask me any questions. I guess I will say one thing. I always have something to say, but the upland along the edge of the levee certainly will be. Usually the marshes take care of themselves. They're not a problem with sediment comes in and they bring in seeds and marsh plants grow. But the upland areas that are adjacent are more problematic. And you may have noticed that Straw, the students and teachers restoring a watershed, have already planted a part of that levee, and it looks quite nice. So we're planning on contracting with them to work on the rest of it, and they have an educational program in addition to giving the kids an opportunity to plant, and the kids from Bahia Vista School had planted, and we hope they'll plant again next time, and that will be probably something we'll be taking on responsibility for.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. All right, with that, Leslie, could we open up the session to public comments?
Yes, so for those in attendance, if you wish to speak and you are phoning in, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Otherwise, please use the raise the hand icon at the bottom of the screen if you hover there. Such a quiet group today. Give you another second or two, *9, or raise the hand icon. No one wishes to speak. from the public. Yeah. So, and then and again, as we turn it back to the commission, just a reminder, you're welcome to say anything about the merits of the project, but the comments we're really looking to get is on the adequacy of the draft EIR and the technical studies. And this will come before you as a hearing item. It will be in January. So that would be on the actual use permit entitlements and permits and discretionary and the merits of the project. So but thank you.
Okay, great. So with that, I will close the public hearing. And I will be calling on each commissioner to ask for comments on the draft EIR. So Commissioner Harris, could we start with you? Do you have any comments?
No comment at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. Commissioner Heidman, do you have any comments?
Also no comment at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Lubomirsky is absent. Commissioner Mercado, do you have any comments?
No comments. I mean, I think great job on the team and presenting it. I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting approach. I was wondering historically how often the city has done something like this. I would say for the presentation, that background I think is interesting for the public to be aware of if this is something unique, as well as I know it's outside of the draft EIR. I don't apologize anymore, but if there's chaos in the background, those are my two kids. I think they're wrestling. I can't apologize because it's a wrestling match Monday night or Tuesday night. But I think that was the one thing that jumped out at me in just terms of, I've never seen a project like this before. I thought it was really interesting from the background, but overall, no comments. Thank you again.
Great.
Could I say something about that? It really is unique. One of the there's a lot of marsh restoration projects around, but what's special about this is that we're expanding marshes that used to be there in the bay. Usually people open up levees but this is actually in the bay, and so that's a special feature.
Thank you. Great. Commissioner Saudi, do you have any comments?
I'm just, really gracious. I have a lot of gratitude towards the work that was put towards this, and I think it's going to really improve and make safe, a part of our community that's really important and vital to just, all of San Rafael. And I'm excited that Barbara has been introducing like an educational aspect so that really the kids can have ownership of where they live and they can understand the ecosystem in which they live, and hopefully that'll help us have future stewards of the environment. So overall, I'm excited about the project. I hope we can start it. I'm hoping that timeline starts in 2022. I mean, obviously it can't start in 2021 because it was like Q3 or something, but hopefully you guys can get going soon and we can see all the benefits that are reaped with the project.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Savi. Chair Samutsi is absent, and I'll just finish with myself, and I'll say that I agree with what all the other commissioners have said. I actually think that this project is, it could be considered critical as a precedent to dealing with climate change in order to reduce flooding at at-risk communities like the Canal. And so I'm very much in favor of this project. I think we can learn a lot from it. I also think that it's consistent with the spirit of the people of San Rafael in two ways. One, habitat restoration, and also, as I mentioned, protecting an at-risk community from climate change. So I want to really thank everyone involved in this project, particularly the Audubon Society. All right, with that, there is no motion. Is that correct, Leslie? Let me confirm with that.
No motion, just comments. Yes.
Great, excellent. So I think with that, we'll bring this part of the meeting to a close. And Leslie, is now a good time for the director's report?
Yep, I have some news.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Yeah. What an exciting win-win project. So director's report. On October 18th, Council, I'll give you just some brief things that happened at Council if you did not attend or follow up. Council approved a contract for construction of 2 new fire stations, which are fire stations 54 and 55. I actually looked after reporting this to DRB and they were like, where are they? I looked at this council report and I actually don't know where they are even after looking at the report, but we'll get 2 more fire stations. So that's super exciting. Council also approved an urgency ordinance for ADUs, which prohibits ADUs on certain streets based on slope and the narrowness of the right-of-way. And those streets are listed by name in this report. The urgency ordinance is in effect for 45 days, by which time staff needs to come with an actual ordinance to replace it. So staff is very busy. That is our new housing team, which is our housing manager, Jacob Noonan, and our housing analyst, Alexis Kapitanian. I hope I'm saying her last name correctly. So they are following up with the fire department and HCD to come forward with a non-urgent permanent ADU ordinance. So that is all for the director. And just for my report to you, you've been doing such a great job. I am giving you November off. So yay, no meeting in November. You'll get an official cancellation from the city clerk. But as Elisa mentioned, we have a very packed agenda on December 14th. We have 3 items that are confirmed, and I've actually pushed off 2 because I don't think it's great to have a really super late. I don't think it does anyone any favors. So we have a Ross Terrace project, which is a mitigated neg deck along with the construction of 2 single-family homes in a hillside area. We have the Los Gamos project, which I think you're familiar with, which is, I think, 194 dwelling units mixed use with a small commercial space off of Los Gamos, across from the YMCA there. And then the third item we have is the Aldersley scoping meeting. So Aldersley is the retirement community on Mission on the other side of the highway. So that would be on the east side of the highway. And they are going through a phase development plan and a modification to their plan development. So that is, will be scoping for a focused EIR on historical resources. And that is what we have on the agenda for December. So, and that is all I have.
And I'm guessing you couldn't push it, any of those items to November, right?
I think it's going to be a really long night.
No,
I want to give everyone a fair shot. You know, I would hate for starting a public hearing after 10 is probably just not, you know, it's not a good service for anyone involved, but no. I hear you. If something drops off the Audubon, this will come first. Tiscornia Marsh, I promise that.
Great.
Great, thank you, Leslie. Okay, at this time, I'll ask if any commission members have any communication. If so, go ahead and provide your comments now. Okay, hearing none. Looking around, I don't see any. All right, with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye.